I was standing in my kitchen, staring at the dent in my refrigerator door, when I realized something that would change everything. That dent wasn't from an accident. It was from my father's hand, pressed against my skull as he slammed my head into the cold metal surface just moments before. The sharp metallic taste of blood mixed with the bitter flavor of a truth I had been swallowing for 32 years. My 7-year-old son Eli was crying in the corner, his small body trembling as he watched his grandfather treat his mother like garbage. And in that moment, with my vision still blurred, and my sister Brenda's mocking laughter echoing in my ears, I understood with perfect clarity that I had never had a family here. I had only ever been a resource to exploit. Before we go any further, if this story resonates with you, or if you've ever felt trapped in a toxic relationship, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories of people finding their strength. And drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in my situation. Your support means everything, and it helps others who need to hear these stories find them. Let me take you back to how it all began, because understanding where I came from makes everything that happened next make sense. I grew up in a small house where love was currency, and I was always bankrupt. My parents, Richard and Linda, had 2 daughters, but they only seemed to have room in their hearts for one. Brenda, my older sister by 3 years, was the golden child. Everything she touched turned to approval in my parents' eyes. When she brought home C's, they celebrated her effort. When I brought home straight A's, they reminded me not to become arrogant. When Brenda wrecked her first car at 16, Dad bought her another one within a week. When I asked to borrow the family car to get to my part-time job at 17, I was told I needed to learn responsibility first. The pattern continued into adulthood, with a precision that should have alarmed me. Brenda dropped out of community college after 1 semester. My parents paid her rent for 2 years while she found herself. I worked full-time while putting myself through a 4-year degree in healthcare administration, graduating with honors and $20,000 in student loans. At my graduation, my mother spent the entire ceremony talking about how worried she was about Brenda's latest boyfriend. My father didn't come at all. He was helping Brenda move into her 3rd apartment that year. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was strong enough not to need their validation. I built a career in medical billing, married a good man named Tom, and had Eli when I was 25. For 3 beautiful years, I had my own family, one where love wasn't rationed like wartime supplies. But Tom died in a car accident when Eli was 2, and suddenly, I was a widow at 28. Drowning in grief and medical bills and the terrifying responsibility of raising a toddler alone. That's when my parents swooped in, but not with the support I desperately needed. They offered something far more complicated. They suggested I move back into their house, the same house where I had spent 18 years feeling invisible. They said it would be temporary, just until I got back on my feet. They said Eli needed family around him. They said a lot of things that sounded like love but tasted like obligation. I should have known better. I should have remembered every birthday they forgot, every achievement they minimized, every time they chose Brenda's convenience over my needs. But grief makes you stupid, and loneliness makes you desperate, and I was drowning in both. So I moved back home with my 2-year-old son, back into my childhood bedroom with its faded wallpaper and the smell of old disappointments. The first few months were exactly what I expected. I paid rent, more than market rate for a single bedroom, which my parents said was only fair since I was using their utilities and eating their food. Never mind that I bought my own groceries and kept them on a separate shelf in the refrigerator, labeled with my name like I was living in a college dorm. Never mind that I paid for 1/3 of all utilities, despite only Eli and I using the 2nd bathroom. I told myself it was temporary. Brenda, of course, also lived there. At 31 years old, she had never left. She occupied the master bedroom, the one with the attached bathroom and the walk-in closet. The room that should have been my parents'. She paid nothing. When I asked my mother about it once, she looked at me with genuine confusion and said Brenda was going through a hard time. Brenda had been going through a hard time for approximately 3 decades. The dynamic was suffocating. Brenda worked sporadically, usually retail jobs that she quit after a few months when a manager dared to expect her to show up on time. She spent money like it was on fire, buying designer purses on credit, getting her nails done every 2 weeks, eating out every night. When the bills came due, she would cry to my parents, and they would pay them. They would shake their heads and say she needed to be more responsible. But the checks always cleared. I watched this from the sidelines, working 50-hour weeks, putting every spare dollar into savings, making sure Eli had everything he needed. I watched and I said nothing because I had learned long ago that speaking up only resulted in being told I was jealous, bitter, ungrateful. So I kept my head down and I worked. And I planned, and I told myself I would be out of there in 6 months. 6 months became a year. A year became 2. Somehow, without quite understanding how it happened, I became stuck. The rent my parents charged me was just high enough that saving for a deposit on my own place took longer than it should have. Every time I got close, something would happen. My car would break down. Eli would need new shoes and clothes because kids grow like weeds. My student loan payments, which I had never missed, took their monthly chunk. And slowly, I began to understand that this was by design. My parents needed me there, not because they loved having me home, but because I was useful. I paid rent reliably. I kept the house clean because I couldn't stand living in the mess that Brenda created. I cooked dinner most nights because my parents were getting older, and Brenda's idea of cooking was ordering pizza. I was the responsible one, the one who could be counted on. And that made me valuable in a way that had nothing to do with being their daughter. Brenda seemed to take particular pleasure in my situation. She would make little comments, always with a smile, always where my parents could hear. She would say things like, "It must be hard, being a single mom, having to live with your parents at your age." She would say, "I'm so glad I don't have kids. I like my freedom." She would look at Eli with a mix of pity and disdain, as if he were a burden I had foolishly chosen to carry. Eli, bless him, was a sensitive child. He picked up on everything. He would ask me why Aunt Brenda looked at him like that. He would ask why Grandpa hugged Aunt Brenda but just patted his head. He would ask why we lived in the small room when Aunt Brenda had the big room with all the space. I didn't have good answers. I would tell him that we were saving money, that we would have our own place soon, that everything would be different. And he would believe me because he was 6 years old and he trusted me completely. And that trust was a weight that sometimes made it hard to breathe. The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday morning in November. I should have seen it coming. But toxic families have a way of normalizing the abnormal until you don't recognize danger when it's standing in front of you, holding a stack of car loan documents. I had just gotten Eli settled at the kitchen table with his cereal. He was wearing his favorite dinosaur pajamas, the ones that were getting too small but that he refused to give up. I was making coffee, the cheap instant kind because the good stuff was too expensive, and trying to mentally prepare for another day at the clinic where I worked. It was early, barely past 7, and I was hoping for a few moments of quiet before the chaos of the day began. Then Brenda walked in, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. She had that look on her face, the one that meant she wanted something and was prepared to make everyone miserable until she got it. Behind her was my father, his jaw already set in that stubborn line. That meant he had decided something and no amount of reason would change his mind. Brenda slapped a stack of papers down on the kitchen table, right next to Eli's cereal bowl, hard enough that milk sloshed over the edge. Eli jumped, his spoon clattering against the bowl, his eyes going wide with that instant fear that children get when they sense adult anger. "Sign this," Brenda said, and there was no please, no explanation, just a command delivered like I was her servant. I looked down at the papers. Car loan documents. Not just any car loan, but one for a brand new sports car. One of those sleek red models that cost more than I made in 6 months. My name was already filled in on the cosigner line in Brenda's looping handwriting, as if my agreement was such a foregone conclusion that she hadn't bothered to wait for my permission. "What is this?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what it was. "I need you to cosign," Brenda said, her voice sharp with impatience. "I need a new car and the dealer won't approve me without a cosigner. You have good credit, so you're signing." Not asking, telling. I looked at my father, hoping for some sign that he understood how insane this was, but he was nodding. His arms crossed over his chest, his expression set in stone. "She needs a car. Sarah. Her old one died. You make more money than she does. This is what family does." The coffee pot beeped behind me, a cheerful sound that felt obscene in the tension of the moment. Eli had stopped eating, his spoon frozen halfway to his mouth, his eyes darting between us like he was watching a tennis match. Brenda has wrecked 2 cars already, I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage. She's never made a car payment on time. I can't co-sign for a $30,000 loan for a sports car. It's not $30,000. Brenda snapped. It's $28,000. Don't be dramatic. That's not better. Brenda, that's not better at all. I could feel something building in my chest. A pressure that had been accumulating for years. Décades. A lifetime. You don't pay your bills. You've defaulted on credit cards. You've had 2 cars repossessed. I'm not putting my name on your debt. My father's face darkened. He took a step toward me, and I saw Eli shrink back in his chair, trying to make himself smaller. That should have been my first warning. Children know when violence is coming even before adults do. You're being selfish, my father said, his voice low and dangerous. After everything we've done for you, we gave you a place to live when your husband died. We've helped you raise that boy. And now your sister needs help and you're going to say no. You didn't help me, I said, and I heard my voice shaking, but I couldn't stop it. I pay you rent. I pay more rent than I would for my own apartment. I buy my own food. I take care of Eli by myself. You've never once offered to babysit. You've never. Don't you dare throw that in our faces, my mother said, appearing in the doorway in her bathrobe, her face puffy with sleep and resentment. We let you live here out of the goodness of our hearts. I pay you $1,500 a month for 1 bedroom. You're being ungrateful, Brenda said, and she smiled. That terrible smile that I had seen 1,000 times before. She looked at Eli, who was now openly crying, silent tears running down his cheeks as he tried not to make noise. Maybe you should teach your son about reality before he grows up as useless as you. The words hung in the air like poison gas. I looked at my son, at his small body shaking, at the way he was trying so hard to be invisible, and something inside me cracked. Not broke. Cracked. Like ice on a river in spring, the kind of crack that means the whole surface is about to give way. No, I said. My voice was steady now. Clear. I'm not signing anything. My father moved fast for a man in his 60s. One moment he was standing near the door. The next, he was beside me, his hand fisted in my hair. The pain was immediate and shocking, a bright burst of agony that made my vision swim. Dad, don't, I started to say, but he was already moving, already dragging me toward the refrigerator by my hair. I tried to resist, tried to pull away, but he was stronger than I remembered. Or maybe I had forgotten what it felt like to be powerless in the face of someone who was supposed to protect you. He slammed my head into the refrigerator door once. Hard. The sound it made was worse than the pain. A hollow metallic boom that seemed to echo through the entire house. My ears rang. My vision went white at the edges. I tasted blood from where I had bitten my tongue. Your brain is just garbage, he said, his mouth close to my ear. His breath hot and sour. Always has been. From somewhere far away, I heard Ellie screaming. Mommy, Mommy. Stop. Leave her alone. And I heard Brenda laughing. Actually laughing. Like this was entertainment. Like watching her father assault her sister was the funniest thing she had seen all week. My father let go of my hair and I staggered, catching myself on the kitchen counter. The room tilted and swayed. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision, trying to breathe through the panic that was flooding my system. Eli was out of his chair, trying to get to me, but Brenda blocked his path. She looked down at him with contempt. Sit down and shut up, she told him. Unless you want to go get a job to pay for your mom's mistakes. He's 7 years old, I managed to say, my voice hoarse. Then he should learn early, Brenda said. She turned back to me. Sign the papers. Sarah, stop being difficult. I looked at the papers, still sitting on the table, wrinkled now from where Eli's hands had gripped the edge. I looked at my son, still crying, his face red and blotchy and terrified. I looked at my father, standing with his arms crossed, not a hint of remorse on his face. I looked at Brenda, smiling like she had already won. And I said, "No." The word came out steady and certain. And I said it again, louder. "No. I'm not signing anything. Not now. Not ever." My father's face went purple. "You ungrateful little. We're done here," I said. I went to Eli, pushing past Brenda, and picked him up even though he was really too big to carry anymore. He wrapped his arms and legs around me like a baby monkey, his face buried in my neck, his whole body shaking. "We're leaving. You'll be back," my father said, pointing at the papers. "You'll come crawling back when you realize you can't make it on your own. We'll be at IHOP having breakfast. You think about what you're throwing away. Think about what happens to that kid when you fail." They left then, Brenda and my father, the sound of their laughter following them out the front door. I heard their car start, heard them drive away. And then there was silence, except for Eli's muffled sobs against my shoulder. I stood in that kitchen holding my son, and I looked at that dent in the refrigerator door, the one my head had made. I looked at the papers on the table. I looked at the life I had been living. I really looked at it for the first time in years. And I understood with perfect clarity that this was not an aberration. This was not unusual behavior. This was who they were. This was who they had always been. And I understood something else. Something that should have been obvious, but that I had spent 3 decades refusing to see. I was not their daughter. I was their resource. I was the one who paid bills and kept house and could be counted on to do what she was told. And Eli, my precious boy, was learning every single day that this was what family looked like. That this was what love looked like. That his mother was worthless, and he probably was too. I could not let that happen. I would not let that happen. I carried Eli to our bedroom and locked the door. I sat on the bed with him in my lap, and I held him until he stopped shaking. He hiccuped against my shoulder, his voice small and broken. "Mommy, why do they hate us?" The question broke something in me, but it broke it clean, like a bone that was set wrong and needed to be rebroken to heal properly. "They don't hate us, baby," I said, stroking his hair. "They just don't know how to love us. But that's okay. We know how to love each other, and that's what matters." "Are we leaving?" he asked, pulling back to look at my face. His eyes were so hopeful, so desperate, that I felt my throat tighten with tears I couldn't let fall yet. "Yes," I said. "We're leaving. And we're never coming back." For the next week, I planned. I went to work like normal. I came home like normal. I made dinner and cleaned the kitchen and paid my rent on time like normal. But everything had changed. And I think my parents could sense it, even if they couldn't quite identify what was different. They didn't apologize. They never mentioned the incident. When I came home from work the next day, the papers were gone from the table, thrown in the trash, and no one said a word about them. Brenda acted like nothing had happened. My father acted like nothing had happened. My mother, who had witnessed the whole thing, acted like nothing had happened. And that, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. I looked up apartments online during my lunch breaks. I called domestic violence hotlines during my commute, asking them questions about my legal rights, about how to protect Eli, about whether what happened constituted assault. They said yes, it did, and they gave me numbers for lawyers and therapists and support groups. I wrote everything down in a small notebook that I kept hidden in my purse. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, one my parents didn't know about. I had learned that lesson the hard way when I was 22, and my mother had convinced me to make her a joint account holder for emergencies, then used it to pay off one of Brenda's credit cards without asking. I transferred most of my savings there, leaving just enough in the old account that if my parents checked, they wouldn't notice anything unusual. I packed slowly, carefully, taking only what we absolutely needed. Clothes, important documents, Eli's favorite toys, some photos of Tom, because Eli deserved to remember his father. Everything fit into 2 large duffel bags and my work backpack. It was shameful. Really? How little we had accumulated in 3 years of living there. But it also made us mobile. And mobility was freedom. I found an apartment across town. A tiny 2-bedroom in an old building that smelled like cabbage and had carpet stains. I didn't want to think too hard about, but it was ours. And it was available immediately. And the landlord didn't require references from family. I signed the lease on a Friday afternoon, paid the deposit and first month's rent, and got the keys. The next Monday, while my parents were at work and Brenda was at her newest job, a retail position at a makeup store that I knew she wouldn't last at for more than a month, I loaded everything we owned into my car. It took 2 trips. On the second trip, I stood in that bedroom one last time, looking at the faded wallpaper with the pink roses, the same wallpaper that had been there when I was 8 years old. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel much of anything except a cold, clear certainty that this was right. This was necessary. I left the key on the kitchen counter with a note that said simply, "Thank you for everything. We're moving out. I'll send you the new address once we're settled." I knew I would never send them the address, but it seemed important to maintain some pretense of civility, some fiction that this was a normal moving out and not an escape. The apartment was tiny and the neighborhood was sketchy, and we ate ramen noodles for dinner more nights than I wanted to count. But it was ours. The locks were ours. The silence was ours. The peace was ours. Eli bloomed in ways I hadn't realized he had been wilting. He started sleeping through the night without nightmares. He started smiling more, laughing more, acting like a child instead of a tiny adult trying to stay invisible. He made friends at his new school. His teacher said he was thriving. I changed my phone number. I didn't tell my parents. I blocked them on social media. I made sure the school had explicit instructions that only I was authorized to pick up Eli, that no grandparents or aunts were allowed near him without my written permission. I contacted my employer's HR department and made sure my emergency contact information was updated and that my family was not listed anywhere. I was erasing them from my life. And it felt like surgery. Necessary. Painful. But ultimately healing. The first few months were brutal. Money was impossibly tight. After rent and utilities and groceries and gas and Eli's school supplies, there was almost nothing left. I picked up extra shifts at work whenever I could. I started taking online courses in medical coding at night after Eli went to bed, knowing that certification would mean better pay, a better future. I met Jessica at work during this time. She was a medical assistant, warm and funny and kind in a way that felt genuine rather than performative. We started having lunch together. Eventually, I told her a sanitized version of my story, the basics without the worst details. She didn't judge. She didn't offer advice I hadn't asked for. She just listened. And then she said, "You're so much stronger than you think you are." I didn't feel strong. I felt tired and scared and overwhelmed, but I appreciated the sentiment. Months passed. 6 months. 9 months. A year. I finished my medical coding certification and immediately got a better position at a larger hospital with better pay and benefits. Suddenly, we had breathing room. I could buy Eli new clothes without calculating exactly how much was left in the account. I could buy fresh vegetables instead of canned. I could start putting money back into savings. We developed routines. Just the 2 of us. Saturday morning pancakes. Sunday afternoon walks in the park. Reading together before bed every single night. These small rituals felt revolutionary because they were chosen, not endured. They were ours. I thought about my family sometimes. In the quiet moments, I wondered if they missed us. I wondered if they had even noticed we were gone beyond the inconvenience of losing their reliable rent payment. I wondered if Brenda had found someone else to co-sign her car loan. I didn't reach out. I didn't cave. The temptation was there, especially on hard days when Eli was sick and I had to miss work. Or when the car broke down and the repair bill was more than I had budgeted for. On those days, a small voice in my head would whisper that maybe I had overreacted, that maybe I should call them, that maybe they would help if I just asked nicely. But then I would remember Eli's face that morning. Remember the terror in his eyes? Remember how small he had tried to make himself. And I would remember the dent in the refrigerator door, and I would remember that my father had never once apologized, had never once suggested that slamming his daughter's head into a major appliance might have been inappropriate. And the temptation would pass. 2 years after we left, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Brenda. her voice strange and uncertain in a way I had never heard before. "Sarah, it's me." I said nothing. "I need to talk to you. Can we meet somewhere?" "No," I said. "Please. It's important. It's about Dad and Mom." "I don't care," I said, and I meant it. That was the shocking part. I genuinely did not care. "They need help," Brenda said. And now there was an edge to her voice, that familiar sharpness returning. "Dad lost his job. They're behind on the mortgage. They might lose the house. And you want money?" I said flatly. "I want you to do the right thing. They're our parents. Sarah. They raised us." "No," I said again. "Goodbye, Brenda." I hung up. She called back immediately. I didn't answer. She called 17 more times that day from different numbers. I blocked them all. 3 weeks later, they showed up at my apartment. I don't know how they found my address. Maybe they followed me from work. Maybe they hired someone. It didn't matter. They were there, standing outside my door on a Tuesday evening when I got home from work with Eli. They looked smaller than I remembered. My father was wearing the same jacket he had worn for 10 years, but now it hung loose on a frame that had shrunk. My mother's hair was more gray than brown, and Brenda had a black eye, still yellow around the edges, that she hadn't bothered to cover with makeup. Eli saw them through the living room window before I could stop him. He froze, his hand clutching his backpack strap, his face going pale. Then he turned away and went to his room without a word, closing the door softly behind him. The fact that he didn't slam it, that he was still trying to be quiet and good and invisible, broke my heart. They knocked. I stood on the other side of the door, my hand on the deadbolt, and I listened. "Sarah, please. We know you're in there. We just want to talk." My mother's voice, thin and reedy. "We need help. Baby girl. We wouldn't be here if we weren't desperate." My father's voice, attempting warmth and missing by a mile. "Don't be such a cold bitch. We're family." Brenda's voice? And there it was. The real Brenda, underneath whatever act she had been attempting on the phone. I opened the door, but I didn't undo the chain lock. I looked at them through the 6-inch gap. These people who had raised me. These people who I had spent 3 decades trying to please. "You can't come in," I said. "Sarah, please." My mother started, but I cut her off. "I can't help you," I said. "You need to leave. We don't have anywhere to go," my father said, and his voice broke, and I felt nothing. That was the most shocking part. I looked at my father's tears and I felt absolutely nothing. "That's not my problem," I said. "How can you be so cruel?" my mother asked. And she was crying too. But they were angry tears. Tears of frustration rather than genuine sadness. "After everything we did for you, what did you do for me?" I asked. And my voice was calm, almost curious. "Tell me one thing you did for me that wasn't conditional on me being useful to you." They looked at each other, genuinely confused by the question. "We gave you a place to live," my father said, finally. "I paid you rent. Above market rate. We helped you raise Eli. You never once offered to babysit. You never changed a diaper. You never helped with homework. What exactly did you do?" Brenda pushed forward, her face contorted with rage. "You think you're better than us now. You think your little apartment and your little job make you special." "No," I said. "I think I'm finally free of you. That's all. We're homeless," my mother said, and the desperation in her voice was real. "We lost the house. We've been staying with friends, but we've run out of options. We need money. Sarah, we need a place to stay. Just for a few weeks until we get back on our feet." I looked at them, really looked at them. My mother, who had watched her husband slam her daughter's head into a refrigerator and said nothing. My father, who had used his physical strength to intimidate and control. Brenda, who had spent 3 decades taking everything and giving nothing. I thought about letting them in. I thought about what it would mean, having them in my space, in Eli's space, in this safe place we had built. I thought about how quickly everything would fall apart, how quickly we would be back where we started. "No," I said. "No," my father repeated, disbelief and rage mixing on his face. You're really going to let your parents be homeless? You're not homeless yet, I said. I went to my kitchen counter and grabbed a piece of paper and a pen. I wrote down addresses and phone numbers, resources I had memorized 2 years ago when I was planning my own escape. Here are some shelters. Here are some social services agencies. Here's a food bank. You can call these numbers for assistance. I handed the paper through the gap in the door. My mother took it like it was contaminated. You expect us to go to a shelter? She asked, her voice high with indignation. I expect you to take care of yourselves, I said, like I've been doing for the last 2 years. You're just going to abandon us? Brenda asked, and she tried to get her hand through the gap in the door. I tried to grab at me, but I stepped back. I'm going to live my life, I said. You're welcome to live yours. My father's face went red. That familiar color that meant violence was coming. You're nothing without us. You'll fail. You'll come crawling back. No, I said, I won't. Your son will grow up knowing his mother chose to let her parents suffer. My son will grow up knowing his mother chose to protect him from people who hurt us, I said. Now leave. If you come back, I'll call the police and file a restraining order. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt and the chain. I stood there listening to them argue on the other side. Brenda's voice getting louder and more hysterical. My father cursing. My mother crying. Eventually, they left. I watched through the window as they got into an old car I didn't recognize and drove away. I went to Eli's room. He was sitting on his bed, his knees pulled up to his chest. His dinosaur stuffed animal clutched against him. He looked up at me with eyes that were too old for his face. Are they going to come back? He asked. I don't know, I said honestly. But if they do, I won't let them in. I promise. He nodded, processing this. I was scared, he admitted. I know. Baby, I was scared too. But you still said no. Yeah, I still said no. He thought about this for a moment. Then he said, I'm proud of you, Mom. And I realized, standing in my son's room in our tiny apartment with its stained carpet and the smell of the neighbors cooking seeping through the walls, that I was proud of me too. They tried a few more times over the next year. Brenda showed up at the hospital where I worked, trying to get past security, causing such a scene that I had to have her officially banned from the premises. My father sent letters, some apologetic, some threatening, all of them asking for money. My mother called from borrowed phones, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful to angry to manipulative. I didn't respond to any of it. I saved everything, just in case I ever needed evidence for a restraining order. But I didn't respond. I heard through the grapevine, through a former neighbor who found me on social media, that they had lost the house, that they were living in a rental apartment much smaller than the one I had, that Brenda had finally gotten a steady job out of necessity rather than choice, that my father was working security at a grocery store, that they were, in their own way, surviving. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel revenge. I just felt nothing. They were strangers who had once been important to me, and now they were just people I used to know. Life got better. Slowly. Incrementally. But definitely better. I got another promotion at work. Eli started middle school and joined the robotics club. We moved to a better apartment, one with 2 real bedrooms and windows that didn't rattle in the wind. I started dating again. Cautiously. Meeting a lawyer named David through Jessica. He was kind and patient, and he didn't push when I said I needed to take things slow. I went to therapy. I talked about my childhood, about the patterns I had accepted as normal, about the ways I had been conditioned to believe I was worthless. The therapist said I had been scapegoated, that I had been raised in a textbook dysfunctional family system where one child was elevated and the other was diminished to maintain the parent's psychological equilibrium. She said I was remarkably resilient. I said I didn't feel resilient. She said that was normal too. Years passed. 5 years. 7 years. Ellie grew into a confident, compassionate teenager who knew his worth and didn't apologize for taking up space in the world. He had friends. He had hobbies. He had a future that he was excited about. And he had a mother who would die before she let anyone make him feel the way I had felt growing up. I saw my father one more time. Years after that confrontation at my door. I was at the grocery store on a Saturday morning, the same one where I had heard he worked security. I was in the produce section, carefully selecting apples, when I saw him across the aisle, helping an elderly woman carry her bags to her car. He looked so much older than I remembered. His hair was completely white now. His shoulders were stooped. His uniform hung loose on a frame that had shrunk even more. He looked up and saw me. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the bins of fruit and vegetables. I waited for something to happen inside me. Some surge of emotion, anger or sadness or even pity. But there was nothing. He was just an old man in a security uniform. A stranger who happened to share some of my DNA. Eli was with me, tall now at 15, nearly as tall as I was. He followed my gaze and saw his grandfather. He didn't say anything, just moved slightly closer to me. A protective gesture that made my heart ache with love for him. My father lifted his hand slightly. Not quite a wave. More like an acknowledgement. I nodded once. A simple recognition of his existence. Nothing more. Then I turned back to the apples. Selected 3 more. And moved on to the next aisle. Eli waited until we were in the car to speak. Was that hard, he asked? No, I said. And I was surprised to realize it was true. It wasn't hard at all. Do you ever miss them, he asked, his voice careful, like he was worried about hurting me with the question. I thought about it honestly. I miss the idea of them, I said finally. I miss having parents who love me unconditionally. But those people never existed. The people who actually raised me. The real them. No, I don't miss them at all. He nodded, satisfied with this answer. I don't miss them either, he said. They were mean to you. They scared me. I know. Baby, I'm sorry you ever had to be around that. It's not your fault, he said. So matter of fact. So certain. You got us out. That's what matters. And he was right. That was what mattered. David and I got married when Eli was 16. It was a small ceremony. Just close friends and the family we had chosen rather than the family we had been born into. Jessica was my maid of honor. Eli walked me down the aisle. His arm linked through mine. His face serious and proud. When the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" Eli said, "She gives herself. But I support her choice." Everyone laughed. But I cried. Because it was so perfectly Eli. So perfectly the young man he had become. I didn't invite my parents. I didn't invite Brenda. I didn't even tell them I was getting married. It wasn't about punishing them. It was simply that they weren't part of my life anymore. And this moment, this beautiful moment, was mine. Ours. And I wasn't going to let their toxicity poison it. Brenda found out somehow, probably through social media stalking, and sent a long, rambling email about how hurt she was to be excluded from her sister's wedding. How family should come first. How I had changed and not in a good way. I read it once, then deleted it, without responding. There was nothing to say. We spoke different languages now. She spoke the language of obligation and manipulation, and I spoke the language of boundaries and self-respect. And there was no translation between the two. Life continued. Good days and bad days. Triumphs and setbacks. The normal rhythm of existence. But it was my existence. Chosen, and claimed, and protected. I advanced in my career, eventually becoming the billing manager for a large medical group. Eli graduated high school with honors and got accepted to a good college with a partial scholarship. David's practice thrived. We bought a house. A real house with a yard and a garden, and enough bedrooms that Eli could come home for holidays and still have his own space. I learned things about myself in those years. Things I had never had the space or safety to discover when I was still tangled in my family's dysfunction. I learned that I was funny, that I could make people laugh without putting myself down as the punchline. I learned that I was creative, that I loved gardening and cooking, and trying new recipes without the pressure of feeding people who criticized every meal. I learned that I was enough, just as I was, without having to prove my worth through service or sacrifice or silent suffering. I learned that healing wasn't linear. That some days I would still feel that old familiar guilt. That voice in my head saying I should reach out. I should forgive. I should give them another chance. But I learned to recognize that voice for what it was, the conditioning of decades, and I learned to thank it for trying to protect me in the only way it knew how. And then I learned to ignore it. The last time I heard from any of them was Eli's high school graduation. Somehow, they found out about it. And somehow, they found out where it was being held. I saw them in the auditorium, sitting in the back row. My mother in a dress that had seen better days. My father in a suit jacket that didn't match his pants. Brenda looking older and harder than I remembered. They didn't approach us. They just sat there, watching. As Eli walked across the stage to receive his diploma, as his name was called out along with his scholarship awards, as the audience applauded, I watched them watching us, and I felt a moment of something that might have been pity. They looked so diminished, so defeated. These people who had once seemed so powerful and terrifying. After the ceremony, as we were taking photos outside, my mother approached. Just her, not my father or Brenda, who hung back like they knew they weren't welcome. She walked slowly, hesitantly, like she was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "Sarah," she said, and her voice was small and uncertain. "Could I just say congratulations to Eli?" I looked at Eli. He was 17 now, almost a man, tall and strong and confident. He looked at his grandmother. This woman, he barely remembered. And I saw him making a calculation, weighing options, considering consequences. He had learned so much from watching me set boundaries, from seeing me protect myself and him, from understanding that love doesn't mean tolerating abuse. "No, thank you," he said politely. "I don't think that would be comfortable for anyone." My mother's face crumpled. "I'm your grandmother," she said, and there were tears in her eyes. But they were the wrong kind of tears. The manipulative kind. The kind designed to make other people feel guilty. "You were never my grandmother," Eli said, his voice calm and factual. "You were the woman who lived in the house where my mom and I used to live. That's all." She looked at me then, pleading. "Sarah, please, don't turn him against us." "I didn't turn him against you," I said. "You did that yourselves. When you hurt me in front of him, when you scared him, when you showed him exactly who you were." "We've changed," she said desperately. "We're different now. We're trying to do better." "Good," I said, and I meant it. "I hope you are different. I hope you're better. But that doesn't mean we need to be in your life to witness it. Don't we deserve a second chance? You had thousands of chances," I said. "Every day of my childhood was a chance to see me, to value me, to treat me like I mattered. Every day for 32 years was a chance. You used all those chances to hurt me instead. Sonu, you don't get another one." She opened her mouth to say something else. But David stepped forward, his hand gentle on my shoulder. "I think it's time for you to leave," he said, his lawyer voice calm and authoritative. "This is a day of celebration for our family. You're not part of that family. Please respect that." She looked at all of us. At me and David and Eli standing together, united. A family that actually functioned, and something in her face shifted. It was like she finally understood, finally saw what she had lost, what she had thrown away through her own choices and actions. But understanding came too late. Some things, once broken, can't be repaired. She walked away. I watched her rejoin my father and Brenda, watched them have a hushed, urgent conversation, watched them eventually leave the parking lot. I never saw them again. That night, after the graduation party, after all the guests had gone home, after Eli had gone to bed exhausted and happy, I sat on the back porch with David, looking at the stars. "Do you think I did the right thing?" I asked him. "Cutting them off completely, never giving them another chance." He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think you did the only thing you could do to survive," he said finally. "And I think you built something beautiful out of the wreckage they left behind. Look at Eli. Look at the man he's becoming. He knows he's loved. He knows his worth. He knows that respect and kindness aren't optional extras in relationships. They're requirements. You taught him that by showing him, by living it. That's not something your parents ever taught you. I wish I could have had what he has," I said quietly. "A childhood where I felt safe, where I felt valued, I know, David said, taking my hand, but you gave it to him instead. You broke the cycle. That takes incredible strength. Some days it doesn't feel like strength. Some days it just feels like survival. Survival is strength, he said, especially when the alternative was letting them destroy you. We sat there in comfortable silence, and I thought about the journey I had taken. From that morning in my parents' kitchen with my head ringing and my son crying, to this moment, sitting on my own porch in my own house with my own family, it had been a long road. Longer and harder than I ever could have imagined. But I had walked it. Step by painful step. I had walked it. And somewhere along the way, I had stopped being their victim and started being my own hero. Eli left for college that fall. The house felt too quiet without him. But it was a peaceful quiet. Not the suffocating silence of fear and tension that I had grown up with. He called every week. Sometimes more. He told me about his classes. His friends. The girl he was dating. He asked for advice about time management and budgeting, and whether he should change his major. He treated me like his mother. Not his servant or his burden or his disappointment. Just his mother. I thought sometimes about what my parents were doing, whether they were still together, whether they had finally figured out how to function without someone to exploit, but I didn't look them up. I didn't ask around. Their story was no longer my story, and I was content to leave it that way. Years passed. More years. A decade after that graduation, I was at a hospital fundraiser. One of those fancy events with silent auctions and speeches and people in uncomfortable formal wear. I was there representing my company. Networking and schmoozing, and doing all the things that career advancement required. And across the room, I saw Brenda. She was serving champagne, wearing a catering uniform. Her hair pulled back in a practical bun. She looked tired. She looked older than she should have. The way people look when life has been harder than they expected. She moved through the crowd efficiently, professionally, invisible in the way service workers often are at these kinds of events. She didn't see me at first. I watched her for a moment. This woman who had tormented me, who had laughed when our father hurt me, who had spent 3 decades taking everything and giving nothing. I waited for anger, for satisfaction, for some kind of emotional response, but all I felt was a distant sort of sadness. The way you might feel reading about a tragedy in a foreign country. Something unfortunate had happened to someone. But it wasn't my tragedy. It wasn't my country. It wasn't my responsibility to fix. She looked up and saw me. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by something that might have been shame, or fear, or just exhaustion. She started to move toward me, but I turned away and walked in the other direction. I didn't owe her a conversation. I didn't owe her anything. Later that night, David asked me if I was okay. I told him about seeing Brenda. He asked if I wanted to talk about it. I realized I didn't. She was just someone I used to know. Someone from a life I had left behind. And that life had no power over me anymore. I'm fine, I said. And it was true. I was fine. Better than fine. I was happy. My phone rang late one evening when I was 53 years old. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. A nurse from a hospital I didn't recognize. Calling to inform me that Richard Campbell had passed away. Heart attack. Quick. No suffering. They had found my name and number in his wallet as his emergency contact. I thanked the nurse for letting me know. She asked about funeral arrangements. I told her I wouldn't be involved. That she should contact his other daughter. And I gave her Brenda's last known phone number. The nurse was clearly uncomfortable with this. Clearly expected some kind of emotional response. But I didn't have one to give. I hung up the phone. I told David. He asked how I felt. I didn't know. I felt strange, untethered in a way I hadn't expected. But not sad. My father was dead. And I felt the same way I might feel learning that a former coworker I barely remembered had passed away. Sorry for the loss, in a vague general sense, but not personally affected. Do you want to go to the funeral? David asked. No, I said immediately. No, I don't think so. Would it give you closure? I thought about that. I already have closure. I said. I got my closure when I walked out of that house with Eli. When I stopped letting them define my worth, When I built this life, I don't need a funeral to close a door I shut years ago. Brenda called me 3 days later. I let it go to voicemail. She left a rambling message about the funeral, about how I should be there, about how it was the right thing to do, about how Dad had always loved me, even if he hadn't shown it well. I deleted the message without finishing it. She called again the next day, and the day after that. Finally, I answered, just to make it stop. I'm not coming to the funeral, I said before she could launch into whatever speech she had prepared. He was your father, Brenda said, and her voice was sharp with anger and something else. Something that sounded like desperation. He was a man who hurt me repeatedly and never apologized. I said, that's all he was. You can't still be holding on to that, she said, and I could hear the disbelief in her voice. That was so long ago. People make mistakes. Deliberate. Repeated abuse isn't a mistake, Brenda. It's a choice. He made his choices. I made mine. Mom needs you, she said, changing tactics. She's devastated. She's all alone now. She has you. I can't do everything. Brenda snapped. I have my own life. She needs her daughters. Both of them. Then I guess she should have treated both of her daughters like they mattered. I said, I'm sorry for your loss, Brenda. I really am. But I'm not coming to the funeral, and I'm not resuming contact with Mom. My answer is no. It's always going to be no. I hung up. She called back. I blocked the number. I didn't go to the funeral. I stayed home, and I worked in my garden, pulling weeds and planting bulbs that would bloom in the spring. David asked if I was sure I didn't want to go, if I would regret it later. I told him I was certain. The man in that casket had stopped being my father the moment he chose violence over love. I had already mourned the father I wished I had. I had nothing left to mourn for the father I actually got. Eli called that evening. He was 30 now, working as an engineer, engaged to a wonderful woman named Maya who made him laugh. He had heard about his grandfather's death through some distant relative who had tracked him down on social media. Are you okay? Mom, he asked. I'm fine. Honey. Really? Do you want me to come home? No. Baby. Stay where you are. Be with Maya. I'm okay. You don't sound sad. I'm not, I said honestly. Is that terrible? No, he said firmly. It's not terrible. It's honest. He wasn't good to you. You don't owe him grief. After we hung up, I sat on the couch with David, and I cried. But not for my father. I cried for the little girl I had been, the one who had tried so hard to be good enough, to be worthy of love, who had never understood that the failure wasn't hers. I cried for all the years I had wasted feeling worthless. I cried for the time I couldn't get back. But I also felt something like relief, something like freedom. With my father's death, the last thread connecting me to that old life was cut. I was truly, completely, irrevocably free. My mother died 2 years later. Brenda called me again to tell me, her voice flat and exhausted. I thanked her for letting me know. She asked if I would at least help with the costs. I said no. She called me heartless. I said maybe I was. I hung up. I didn't go to that funeral either. Today, I'm 56 years old. I wake up in a house I love, next to a man who respects me, in a life I built with my own hands. Eli and Maya are expecting their first child, a daughter. They're going to name Emma. I'm going to be a grandmother. And I'm terrified and excited and determined to be everything my own grandmother never was. Sometimes people ask me if I regret cutting off my family. They ask if I've considered reconciliation. They tell me that family is important. That grudges hurt the person holding them more than anyone else. That forgiveness is healing. And I tell them that I did forgive. In my own way. I forgave myself for believing I wasn't enough. I forgave myself for staying as long as I did. I forgave myself for hoping they would change. That forgiveness was the most important forgiveness of all. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. Understanding why people hurt you doesn't mean you have to let them keep doing it. And family, real family, isn't about shared DNA. It's about shared love, shared respect, shared effort to build something good together. My family is David. It's Eli and Maya, and baby Emma who's coming soon. It's Jessica, who has been my friend through everything. It's the life I chose, instead of the life that was chosen for me. That dent is still in the refrigerator door at my parents' old house. Or at least it was the last time I drove past. Someone else lives there now. I hope they're happy there. I hope that house holds better memories for them than it ever held for me. I don't think about that dent very often anymore. But when I do, I don't feel pain. I feel proud. Because that dent marks the moment I decided I deserved better. That dent marks the beginning of my real life, and my real life has been beautiful. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. You don't owe anyone your suffering. Not your parents. Not your siblings. Not anyone. Family should be a source of love and support, not pain and exploitation. And if the people who are supposed to love you keep hurting you, you have permission to leave. You have permission to choose yourself. It won't be easy. It will probably be the hardest thing you ever do. You'll doubt yourself. You'll feel guilty. People will tell you you're wrong, that you're cruel, that you're selfish. But choosing to protect yourself and build a life where you're valued isn't selfish. It's survival. It's necessary. It's brave. And on the other side of that fear, on the other side of that guilt, there's a life waiting for you. A life where you get to decide what you deserve. A life where you're not constantly trying to earn love that should have been freely given. A life where you can breathe. That life is possible. I'm living proof. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice to distance yourself from toxic family members? How did you find the strength to prioritize your well-being? Or are you still in the middle of that struggle? Trying to figure out what to do? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or reconsider what family really means, please hit that like button. Subscribe so you don't miss more stories about people finding their strength and reclaiming their lives. And share this with someone who might need to hear it. Someone who might be standing in their own kitchen, looking at their own metaphorical dent, wondering if they have the courage to leave. You do. I promise you. You do. Thank you for listening to my story.